3 days. That's how long Clara Whitmore had been waiting on that godforsaken platform in the middle of Missouri, watching the sun scorch the earth and the townspeople whisper behind their hands. 3 days since she'd stepped off the train from Boston, believing a stranger's promise. 3 days of stares that measured her worth by the curves of her body and found her wanting. The mail-order bride nobody expected. The woman too soft, too round, too hopeful for this brutal frontier. And the man who was supposed to claim her? Nowhere to be found. If you want to discover whether Clara's gamble leads to heartbreak or destiny, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Missouri sun had no mercy. It beat down on the wooden platform like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air thick and heavy, making every breath feel like swallowing fire. Clara Whitmore stood in the shade of the station's overhang, her gloved hands clutching a worn leather satchel, her eyes fixed on the dusty road that stretched toward the horizon. Behind her, the afternoon train hissed and rumbled, preparing to depart. The same train that could carry her back to Boston, back to everything she'd fled. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet. "Still here, miss?" The station master's voice carried a note of pity that made Clara's jaw tighten. He was a wiry man with a sun-weathered face and eyes that had seen too many disappointed women pass through this depot. He'd asked her the same question yesterday, and the day before that. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, her Boston accent still crisp despite 3 days in the dust. "Still here." He shook his head slowly, pulling a pocket watch from his vest. "That's the last eastbound train for 2 days. If you're going to change your mind about this whole arrangement, now's the time." Clara felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Change her mind, go home, admit defeat before she'd even begun. The thought had haunted her through 3 sleepless nights in the cramped hotel room she could barely afford, through 3 long days of watching the road for a rider who never came. "I'll wait," she said quietly. The station master sighed. "Suit yourself, miss, but I've seen this before. Man sends for a bride, changes his mind when she arrives. It ain't personal. This territory's hard on everyone." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara alone with the truth she'd been trying to ignore. Maybe Elias Boone had taken one look at her and decided she wasn't what he wanted after all. She'd sent him a photograph, of course. An honest one. She wasn't going to lie about her appearance, wasn't going to stuff herself into a corset or starve herself into a smaller dress just to trick a man into accepting her. The photograph showed exactly what she was, a soft-featured woman with gentle curves, auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, and eyes that held more determination than beauty. His response had been simple. "You'll do just fine. Come to Cottonwood Station, Missouri. I'll meet you there." But that was before. Before she'd actually arrived. Before he'd seen her step off the train, struggling with her trunk, her dress clinging to her body in the oppressive heat. Before he'd had the chance to disappear. A group of women emerged from the general store across the street, their voices carrying on the still air. Clara recognized them. She'd felt their stares for 3 days now, seen the way they huddled together and whispered, casting glances in her direction like she was some kind of curiosity, a specimen to be examined and discussed. "Poor thing," one of them said, not quite quietly enough. "Still waiting." "I heard the telegram came through yesterday," another replied. "He's not coming. Everyone knows it." "Can you blame him? I mean, look at her. He probably expected someone different." Clara's fingers tightened around her satchel, but she kept her face carefully neutral. She'd heard worse in Boston. Her own aunt had said worse, right to her face, when Clara had announced her intention to answer Mr. Boone's advertisement. "You? A mail-order bride? Clara, dear, you must be realistic. Men seek wives for beauty and childbearing, and you are... Well, you're a lovely girl, but perhaps a position as a governess would be more suitable." Translation: "You're too fat, too plain, too unmarriageable." Never mind that Clara could read Latin and French, that she'd kept her father's accounts after her mother died, that she'd managed an entire household while her younger siblings grew up and married and forgot all about the sister who'd raised them. None of that mattered when measured against the circumference of her waist, so she'd packed her trunk with her mother's quilts and her father's books, and the small inheritance that was all she had left in the world, and she'd bought a one-way ticket west, to a place where maybe, just maybe, someone would value her for something more than her silhouette. And now that someone had left her stranded. The hotel proprietor appeared in the doorway of his establishment, wiping his hands on his apron. "Miss Whitmore, you planning on keeping that room another night?" Every eye on the street turned toward her, waiting, judging. I'm not certain yet," Clara called back. "Well, you let me know before sunset. I got other folks asking after it." She nodded, humiliation burning in her cheeks. Even the hotel didn't want her taking up space. The sun climbed higher, and Clara retreated deeper into the shade. She'd read Mr. Boone's letters so many times she'd memorized them. They'd been practical, straightforward, nothing romantic or flowery. He was a cattleman, recently returned from the war, trying to rebuild his ranch in the territory. He needed a wife who could work hard, manage a household, and stand up to the isolation and hardship of frontier life. "I won't lie to you," he'd written in his second letter. "Life out here is brutal. The winters are harsh, the summers are merciless, and some days the loneliness is worse than both. I'm not looking for a delicate flower. I need a partner, someone with backbone." Clara had backbone. She'd proven that by coming here. But backbone didn't matter much if the man who'd asked for it never showed up to see it. A young girl approached the platform, maybe 10 years old, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She stopped a few feet away, studying Clara with open curiosity. "Ma says you've been here 3 whole days," the girl announced. "That's right," Clara replied, managing a small smile. "Ma also says your husband-to-be probably got eaten by wolves." "Molly Jane Mitchell!" A woman rushed forward, grabbing the child by the shoulder. "You apologize right this instant." "But you said—" "Never mind what I said. Apologize to the lady." The girl mumbled a half-hearted apology, and the woman, presumably Molly's mother, gave Clara an embarrassed smile. "I'm sorry, miss. Children hear everything and understand nothing." "It's quite all right," Clara said, though her heart had gone cold. Wolves. Of course, she'd been so focused on the possibility of rejection that she hadn't considered the alternative. What if something had happened to him? What if he'd tried to come and couldn't? The frontier was dangerous. People died out here all the time, from accidents, animals, weather, violence. What if Elias Boone was dead? The thought brought an unexpected surge of grief, which surprised her. She didn't even know the man, had never met him face to face, but she'd built something in her mind from those practical, honest letters. A partnership. A chance. And now maybe that chance was dead in a ditch somewhere, torn apart by wolves or thrown from a horse or struck by lightning. "Miss?" Molly's mother was looking at her with concern. "Are you all right? You've gone quite pale." "I'm fine," Clara lied. "Just the heat. You should get out of this sun. Why don't you come to our house? I'll make you some lemonade and you can rest in the parlor. It's the least I can do after my daughter's rudeness." The kindness nearly broke her. Clara felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell, but I need to stay here, in case he comes. In case this hasn't all been a terrible mistake." Mrs. Mitchell's expression softened with understanding. "All right, dear, but if you change your mind, we're the blue house at the end of Main Street. You're welcome any time." She led Molly away, and Clara was alone again. The afternoon crawled past. Clara watched the shadows shift across the platform, marking time in increments of despair. The eastbound train departed with a mournful whistle, taking with it her last easy escape. A freight wagon rumbled past, kicking up dust. A drunk stumbled out of the saloon and urinated against a fence post while the sheriff looked the other way. This was Cottonwood Station. This was civilization on the edge of nothing. And somewhere beyond this dusty street, beyond the flat scrubland and the distant tree line, was the ranch where Elias Boone had promised her a new life. If he existed, if he was alive, if he still wanted her. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Clara made a decision. She would wait one more night, just one. And if Elias Boone didn't appear by tomorrow afternoon, she would use the last of her money to buy a ticket back east. Not to Boston. She couldn't bear the shame of returning there. But maybe to St. Louis. Maybe she could find work as a housekeeper or a seamstress. Maybe she could build some small, quiet life where nobody knew she'd once been foolish enough to believe a stranger's promise. She was turning toward the hotel when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the sleepy evening rhythm of the town. A pounding that grew louder with each passing second, urgent and relentless. Hoofbeats. Clara spun back toward the road, her heart suddenly hammering in her chest. Other people were stopping too, turning to look as a rider came into view, a lone figure on a massive bay horse, charging into town like the devil himself was giving chase. The rider was slumped forward in the saddle, hat pulled low, clothes caked with mud, and something that might have been blood. The horse was lathered, exhausted, but still running because its rider demanded it. They thundered straight down Main Street, scattering chickens and startled pedestrians, and didn't slow until they reached the platform where Clara stood frozen. The rider pulled up hard, the horse skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust. For a moment, everything was still. Then the man straightened in the saddle, pushed back his hat, and Clara found herself looking into the most intense pair of gray eyes she'd ever seen. "Clara Whitmore?" His voice was rough, raw, like he'd been shouting into the wind for days. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at this wild, mud-covered stranger who somehow knew her name. "I asked you a question, ma'am. Are you Clara Whitmore?" Yes, she managed. "I am." He swung down from the saddle with a grunt of pain, moving like every muscle in his body hurt. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the dark circles under his eyes, the cut on his temple that had bled and crusted over. His shirt was torn, his pants soaked to the knee. He looked like he'd been through hell. "Elias Boone," he said simply. "I'm 3 days late." Relief and anger crashed over her in equal measure. "I noticed." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "I imagine you did." The sheriff had appeared along with half the town's population. "Boone? That you under all that mud?" "Sheriff," Elias acknowledged, but his eyes never left Clara's face. "Had some trouble out at Widow's Creek. Flash flood. Lost my spare horse and damn near drowned." A murmur ran through the crowd. Widow's Creek was notorious for its unpredictable waters, especially during the summer storms. "You should have sent word," the sheriff said. "Telegram would have reached town yesterday." "Couldn't. Lines were down, and I wasn't about to wait another 3 days for them to fix it." Elias reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, wet and barely legible. "This is the contract. Miss Whitmore and I have an agreement." Clara stared at the ruined paper, at this man who'd ridden through flood and exhaustion to reach her. The practical part of her mind noted that he hadn't apologized, hadn't made excuses or tried to charm her. He'd simply stated the facts and expected her to accept them. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. "I know I'm late. I know you've been waiting, and I know that wasn't fair to you. But I'm here now, and I'm asking, will you still come with me?" The crowd held its breath. Clara looked at this man who'd nearly killed himself and his horse to keep a promise to a woman he'd never met. She saw no pity in his eyes when he looked at her, no disappointment, no hesitation. Just a direct, unflinching gaze that asked a simple question and waited for an honest answer. All her life, people had looked at her and seen something lacking, something not quite enough. Elias Boone looked at her and saw... what? A partner? A promise kept? "I need to know something first," Clara heard herself say. "When you saw me just now, when you rode up and I was standing here, did you think about turning around?" The crowd gasped at her boldness, but Elias didn't flinch. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "Not for 1 second." "Why not?" He considered the question, and Clara appreciated that he didn't rush to answer. Finally, he said, "Because you were still here. 3 days late, and you were still standing on this platform. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Something in Clara's chest loosened, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too long. "Then yes," she said, "I'll still come with you." The relief that flashed across his face was so brief she almost missed it. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "We'll marry tomorrow morning. Judge Adams can do it. Then we'll head to the ranch. It's a 2-day ride, but we can make camp at Willow Springs if you're not used to riding." "Tomorrow?" Clara's voice came out higher than she intended. "Don't you need to rest? Recover?" "I've rested enough in the mud waiting for the water to go down," Elias said flatly. "Every day we waste here is a day the ranch is running without me. We need to move." The practicality of it should have stung, but Clara found it oddly reassuring. This wasn't a romance. This was a business arrangement between two people who needed each other. He needed a wife to help run his ranch. She needed a life that valued her for more than her appearance. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning, then." Elias turned to the crowd. "Sheriff, I'll need you to stand witness. Mrs. Mitchell, would you be willing to stand for Miss Whitmore?" Molly's mother stepped forward, her eyes shining. "Of course, Mr. Boone. It would be my honor." "Good." He turned back to Clara. "Do you have a room at the hotel?" "Yes, for one more night." "Keep it. I'll be at the boarding house down the street. We'll meet at Judge Adams' office at 9 o'clock sharp." He paused, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Pack light. The ranch house has most of what you'll need, and we can send for the rest later." "I understand." He nodded again, then moved to lead his exhausted horse toward the livery. But he stopped after a few steps and looked back at her. "Miss Whitmore? Yes? Thank you for waiting." Then he was gone, limping slightly as he walked, leaving Clara standing on the platform, surrounded by gawking townspeople and the settling dust of his arrival. Mrs. Mitchell rushed forward and grabbed Clara's hands. "Oh, my dear, how exciting! We must get you ready. Do you have a proper dress for the ceremony?" Clara thought of her trunk, packed with practical day dresses and one good Sunday dress that was nice but nothing fancy. "I have a dress." "Well, come to my house right now. We'll press it and make sure everything is perfect. Oh, this is wonderful. A wedding." As Mrs. Mitchell pulled her toward the blue house at the end of Main Street, Clara caught fragments of conversation from the dispersing crowd. "Did you see the state he was in? Man must be desperate." Or honorable. Not many would ride through a flood for a promise. "She's braver than I thought. Agreeing to go with him tomorrow. That ranch is 20 miles from nowhere." Maybe that's exactly what she wants. Nowhere to judge her. That last comment, spoken by one of the women who'd been whispering about her earlier, made Clara smile despite everything. Maybe that was exactly what she wanted. Mrs. Mitchell's house was small, but immaculately kept, with lace curtains and a parlor full of comfortable furniture. Her husband, a quiet man with kind eyes, nodded to Clara and then retreated to his workshop, clearly accustomed to staying out of his wife's way during moments of feminine excitement. "Now then," Mrs. Mitchell said, bustling around her kitchen. "Let's have some tea and discuss the practicalities. Have you given any thought to what you'll need for frontier life?" "I've been reading about it," Claire admitted. "I brought sturdy clothes, basic sewing supplies, some books." "Books?" Mrs. Mitchell laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Oh, honey, books are fine for the long winter nights, but what you'll need first is practical skills. Can you cook over an open fire? Preserve vegetables? Treat minor wounds? Shoot a rifle?" Clara felt her confidence faltering. "I can cook on a stove, I've done plenty of that, and I can sew and manage household accounts. But the rest? You'll learn." Mrs. Mitchell poured the tea and sat down across from her. "Elias Boone is a good man, Clara." "May I call you Clara?" "Please do." "He's had a hard time of it since he came back from the war. Lost his parents to cholera while he was gone, came home to a ranch that had been neglected for years. He's been working himself half to death trying to rebuild it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's not a warm man. The war took that out of him. But he's fair and he's honest and he keeps his word. That ride he made to get here? That's who he is." Clara wrapped her hands around her teacup, absorbing this information. Did he ever say why he wanted a mail-order bride instead of courting someone local? Mrs. Mitchell smiled sadly. "There aren't many unmarried women out here, and the ones that are, well, they're looking for easier lives than a struggling ranch can provide. Elias needed someone practical, someone who understood what she was signing up for." "Someone desperate enough to take the chance," Clara said quietly. "Or brave enough." Mrs. Mitchell reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I watched you these past 3 days, dear. You could have left on any of those trains. You could have given up. But you stood there with your head high, ignoring the gossips, waiting for a man who might never come. That takes courage." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes again. "I had nowhere else to go." "That's not true, and you know it. You could have gone back east, found some other situation, but you chose to stay because you believed in the possibility of something better." "That's not desperation, Clara. That's hope." Maybe Mrs. Mitchell was right. Maybe hope and desperation were two sides of the same coin, and it didn't matter which side landed face up as long as you had the courage to flip it. They spent the evening preparing Clara's dress, a simple blue cotton with white lace trim that her mother had made years ago. Mrs. Mitchell pressed it carefully and made a few minor adjustments to the hem. "You'll be beautiful," she declared, standing back to admire her work. Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw the same woman she'd always been. Soft curves, plain features, nothing special. But maybe that was all right. Maybe Elias Boone didn't need special. Maybe he just needed real. That night, in her small hotel room, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about the magnitude of what she was about to do. Tomorrow, she would marry a stranger. The day after that, she would ride away from civilization into a wilderness she couldn't imagine. Everything she'd known, her life in Boston, her family, her modest social circle, was already gone. Tomorrow, she would step into a new existence entirely. The question was, who would she become? In Boston, she'd been the spinster sister, the dutiful daughter, the woman too fat and too plain for any man to want. Those identities had been assigned to her by other people's judgment, and she'd worn them like heavy chains. But out here, on the edge of the frontier, maybe she could be someone different. Maybe she could be the woman Elias Boone seemed to think she was. Someone strong enough to wait, brave enough to stay, practical enough to build a life from scratch. Maybe she could finally be enough. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Clara made her final preparations. She dressed carefully in her blue cotton dress, pinned her auburn hair into a neat bun, and packed her trunk with everything she owned in the world. It wasn't much. A few dresses, some undergarments, her mother's quilts, her father's books, the silver locket that held pictures of her parents. A whole life reduced to what could fit in one trunk. But maybe that was the point. Maybe you had to let go of everything you'd been in order to become something new. At 5 minutes before 9, Clara walked to Judge Adams' office, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Mrs. Mitchell was already there, wearing her Sunday best and holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you, dear," she said, pressing the flowers into Clara's hands. "Every bride should have flowers." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you." The judge's office was a small, dusty room filled with law books and legal documents. Judge Adams himself was an elderly man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted her. "Everything in order?" "Yes, sir." "Good. We're just waiting for the groom and, here he is." The door opened and Elias Boone walked in. Clara barely recognized him. He'd cleaned up, shaved, and changed into what was clearly his best shirt, still worn, but clean and pressed. The cut on his temple had been bandaged, and his dark hair was slicked back with water. He looked tired, but also somehow more solid than he had yesterday. More real. Their eyes met across the room, and Clara saw the same appraising look she'd noticed before. He was measuring her, taking her full measure as a partner, not as a decoration. She lifted her chin and met his gaze steadily. Something like approval flickered in his expression. "Shall we begin?" Judge Adams asked. The ceremony was brutally brief. No flowery language about love and devotion, no promises of eternal happiness. Just the legal facts. A contract between two adults, witnessed and binding. "Do you, Elias James Boone, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Clara Marie Whitmore, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara's voice was steady. "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Missouri, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride if you're so inclined." Elias looked at her questioningly, and Clara gave a small nod. He stepped forward and pressed a brief, dry kiss to her lips. It was chaste, practical, nothing more than a formality, but it sealed everything. "Congratulations," Judge Adams said, already turning to his paperwork. "Mrs. Mitchell, Sheriff Davis, please sign here as witnesses." And just like that, Clara Whitmore ceased to exist. In her place stood Clara Boone, wife to a man she'd just met, bound for a life she couldn't begin to imagine. Outside the office, Elias turned to her. "I've arranged for your trunk to be loaded on the supply wagon. We'll ride out in an hour. Are you ready?" Ready? She would never be ready. But she was here, and she'd made her choice, and there was no going back now. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm ready." Elias nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw the faintest hint of a smile. "Then let's go home, Mrs. Boone." Mrs. Boone. Clara tested the name silently, feeling its weight, its strangeness, its terrifying possibility. As they walked toward the livery where two horses waited, Elias's big bay and a smaller chestnut mare, Clara glanced back at Cottonwood Station one last time. The platform where she'd waited for 3 days stood empty now, already becoming a memory. She'd stood on that platform as one woman and was leaving as another. The question now was, which woman would survive the frontier? The chestnut mare was smaller than Clara expected, but sturdy-looking with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. Elias checked the saddle and stirrups, adjusting them without asking her height or preference, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Her name's Russet," he said, holding the reins steady. "She's even-tempered and sure-footed. Won't spook easily." Clara approached the horse cautiously, extending her hand for Russet to sniff. The mare's nose was velvet soft against her palm. "I should tell you, I've only ridden a few times. In Boston, we mainly used carriages." "You'll learn." Elias's tone was matter-of-fact, neither encouraging nor critical. "Put your left foot in the stirrup. I'll help you up." She hesitated, acutely aware of her weight, of the logistics of mounting a horse when you weren't built like the slim, graceful women in magazine illustrations. But Elias was already positioning himself to assist, his hands forming a step, and there was nothing in his expression that suggested judgment or impatience. Clara took a breath and stepped into his linked hands. He lifted her with surprising ease, and suddenly she was astride the mare, looking down at the world from a new height. "Good," Elias said. "Keep your heels down, back straight. Russet knows the way, so just let her follow my horse. We'll stop every few hours to rest." He swung onto his bay with the fluid grace of someone who'd been riding since childhood, gathering the reins in one hand. The supply wagon was already waiting at the edge of town, driven by a grizzled man Elias introduced simply as Dutch. "Ma'am," Dutch nodded to her, his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. "Welcome to the outfit." Then they were moving, leaving Cottonwood Station behind in a cloud of dust and possibility. The first hour was agony. Clara's thighs burned, her back ached, and every step the mare took sent jolts through her spine. She gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, trying to find some rhythm, some way to move with the horse instead of against it. Sweat trickled down her back beneath the heavy fabric of her traveling dress, and she deeply regretted not changing into something more practical. Elias rode ahead, his posture relaxed despite the injuries he must have sustained in the flood. He didn't look back to check on her, didn't ask if she needed to stop. The message was clear. She'd agreed to this life, and now she had to live it. Pride kept Clara's spine straight, and her complaints locked behind her teeth. The landscape shifted as they traveled, the flat scrubland giving way to rolling hills dotted with prairie grass and wildflowers. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, a vast blue dome unmarred by the smoke and buildings of city life. Clara had never seen so much space, so much emptiness. It was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Around midday, Elias finally raised his hand and brought his horse to a stop near a cluster of cottonwood trees that marked a small stream. "We'll rest here," he announced. Clara tried to dismount gracefully and failed spectacularly, nearly falling before Elias caught her arm and steadied her. Her legs trembled as they touched solid ground, muscles screaming in protest. "First day's always the hardest," Elias said, releasing her arm. "Sit in the shade. I'll get the horses watered." Clara limped to the trees and collapsed onto the grass, trying not to groan aloud. Dutch was already unpacking supplies from the wagon, producing bread, dried meat, and a canteen of water that he handed to her without comment. "Thank you," Clara managed, her throat parched. She drank deeply, watching as Elias led the horses to the stream. He moved with a slight limp she hadn't noticed before, favoring his left leg. The flood had hurt him more than he'd admitted, but he worked with the same steady efficiency, checking the horses' hooves, loosening their girths, speaking to them in low tones she couldn't quite hear. Dutch settled onto a fallen log and pulled out a pipe. "You done good so far, Mrs. Boone. Most city women would be crying by now." "The day's not over yet," Claire said wryly. That earned her a genuine smile. "Fair point, but Elias don't pick weak partners. He's seen something in you, else he wouldn't have rode through hell to fetch you." Clara wasn't sure about that, but the old man's confidence was oddly comforting. "How long have you worked for him?" "Near about 2 years now. Came on after he got back from the war, when he was trying to get the ranch running again." Dutch puffed on his pipe thoughtfully. "He's a hard man, but a fair one. Don't ask nothing of his people he wouldn't do himself. Works longer hours than any of us, sleeps less, pushes harder. Sometimes too hard." Is that why he needs a wife? Clara asked quietly. Someone to make him rest? Dutch laughed, a dry sound like wind through dead leaves. If you figure out how to make that man rest, you let me know. Nah, he needs a wife because a ranch ain't just cattle and fences. It's a home, and a home needs someone who understands that work ain't the same as living. Before Clara could respond, Elias returned, carrying something wrapped in a cloth. He sat down near her, not close but not distant either, and unwrapped the cloth to reveal hard biscuits and cheese. Eat, he said, offering her a portion. We've got another 5 hours before we make camp. Clara accepted the food, suddenly ravenous despite her exhaustion. They ate in silence for a few minutes before she gathered the courage to ask, "What should I expect when we arrive at the ranch?" Elias chewed thoughtfully before answering. House is solid, built by my father before the war. 2 rooms downstairs, a loft upstairs. Needs work. I haven't had time for much beyond basic repairs. There's a well, a chicken coop, a barn for the horses, and corrals for the cattle. Dutch bunks in the barn loft. How many cattle? About 200 head right now. Used to be more, but we lost a lot during the hard winter 2 years back. We're rebuilding. He paused, his gray eyes meeting hers directly. It's not easy, Clara. I won't lie to you. Some days you'll wonder why you came. Some nights you'll be so tired you can't remember your own name. But if you work hard and don't quit, we'll make something good here. The use of her first name surprised her. It was the first time he'd said it, and hearing it in his rough voice made their marriage suddenly more real. I don't quit, Clara said firmly. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. No, I don't imagine you do. They remounted and continued on, and Clara discovered Dutch had been right. She'd already passed the point where crying would help. Now it was just about endurance, about pushing through the pain and exhaustion, about proving she could do what she'd promised. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Clara's dress clung to her body like a second skin. She tried to find the rhythm Elias had mentioned, tried to move with Russet instead of fighting her, and slowly, painfully slowly, she began to understand. The mare's gait had a pattern, a predictable rise and fall, and when Clara matched her breathing to it, the ride became slightly less torturous. Elias glanced back once and caught her eyes. He nodded, just once, and Clara felt a small surge of pride. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, they arrived at a place Elias called Willow Springs. It was little more than a clearing near a spring-fed pond, surrounded by a few scraggly willow trees that gave the place its name. We'll camp here tonight, Elias announced, dismounting. There's good water and shelter if the weather turns. Clara slid from Russet's back and her legs nearly buckled. She caught herself against the mare's side, breathing hard, every muscle trembling. Go sit down, Elias said, not unkindly. I'll see to the horses. Clara wanted to protest, wanted to help, but her body simply wouldn't cooperate. She made her way to a flat rock near the pond and sat heavily, watching as Elias and Dutch worked together to unsaddle the horses, set up a simple camp, and start a fire. The efficiency of their movements spoke of long practice. They didn't need to discuss who would do what. Each man simply did what needed doing, moving around each other like partners in a well-rehearsed dance. This was the life Clara had married into. A life of constant work, where survival depended on everyone pulling their weight. Could she do this? Could she become the kind of woman who could work alongside these men? Who could contribute instead of being a burden? She had to. There was no alternative. As twilight deepened into darkness, Dutch produced a pot and ingredients for a simple stew. Clara forced herself to stand and approach the fire. Can I help? Dutch looked to Elias, who nodded. You can cut the vegetables. Knife's in the supply box. It was a small task, almost insultingly simple, but Clara attacked it with determination. Her knife work was clumsy compared to Dutch's practiced efficiency, but she got the job done, cutting potatoes and carrots into chunks that went into the pot. You cook much in Boston? Dutch asked conversationally. Some. Mostly on a proper stove, though. I've never cooked over an open fire. It's different, Elias said, speaking for the first time since they'd made camp. Hotter, harder to control. You'll burn things at first. But you'll learn, Dutch added, stirring the pot. Everything out here's about learning and adapting. Them that can't do either don't last long. The stew was simple but delicious, flavored with wild herbs Dutch had gathered while setting up camp. They ate from tin plates, sitting around the fire as darkness settled completely over the prairie. Clara had never experienced darkness like this. In Boston, there were always street lamps, windows glowing with firelight, the ambient light of civilization. But out here, beyond the circle of their small fire, the darkness was absolute and alive with sounds she didn't recognize. Crickets chirping, something rustling in the grass, a distant coyote howl that made her shiver. "You'll get used to it," Elias said, watching her reaction. "The night sounds, I mean. Most of them are harmless." "Most of them?" "Coyotes won't bother us as long as we keep the fire going. Bears are rare this time of year. Snakes are cold-blooded. They don't move much at night." Clara wasn't sure if this information was meant to be reassuring or not. After dinner, Dutch retreated to his bedroll near the wagon, leaving Clara and Elias alone by the fire. The silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Elias cleared his throat. "Your bedroll is in the wagon. I set it up near the fire, but away from the smoke. Should be comfortable enough." Clara looked at the bedroll, then at Elias, suddenly realizing the implications of their situation. They were married, but they were also strangers. What did he expect from her tonight? As if reading her thoughts, Elias said quietly, "I'll sleep on the other side of the fire. This marriage is legal and binding, but we don't know each other yet. I'm not going to push for anything you're not ready to give." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by guilt. "I don't mean to be difficult. It's just, you don't need to explain." Elias stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "We've got time to figure out what this is. Right now, you're exhausted, and tomorrow's another long day. Get some sleep, Clara." She watched him walk to the far side of the fire and roll out his own blankets, giving her the better spot closer to the warmth. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the kind of man he was. Clara settled into her bedroll, her body singing with exhaustion, and stared up at the sky. She'd never seen so many stars. In Boston, the sky had been a distant, hazy thing, barely visible through the smoke and fog. But here, the stars blazed like diamonds scattered across black velvet, so many she couldn't begin to count them. Somewhere in that vast darkness was her future, a ranch she'd never seen, a life she couldn't imagine, a marriage to a man who was still, in many ways, a complete mystery. But for the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt something other than fear or desperation. She felt possibility. The next morning arrived too soon, announced by Dutch banging a spoon against the pot to wake them. Clara sat up, groaning involuntarily as every muscle in her body protested. She felt like she'd been beaten with hammers. "Coffee," Dutch said cheerfully, thrusting a tin cup into her hands. "Helps with the soreness." Clara drank gratefully, the bitter liquid burning down her throat and shocking her system awake. Across the fire, Elias was already moving, checking the horses, rolling up his bedding with military precision. "We'll make the ranch by mid-afternoon if we keep a good pace," he announced. "Eat quick and mount up." Breakfast was leftover biscuits and dried fruit eaten standing up. Then Clara faced her greatest challenge yet, mounting Russet with muscles so stiff she could barely bend her legs. It took 3 attempts and Elias's assistance, but she finally made it into the saddle. He looked up at her, his hand still on her ankle where he'd helped boost her up. "You did good yesterday," he said quietly. "Better than I expected." It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd received from him, and Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "Thank you." He nodded and mounted his own horse, and they rode out of Willow Springs as the sun climbed into a cloudless sky. The second day's ride was both easier and harder than the first. Easier because Clara understood better how to work with the horse, how to conserve her energy, how to find small comforts in the rhythm of travel. Harder because her body was already pushed to its limits, and every mile added to that burden. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop, didn't show weakness. And Elias noticed. She could feel his attention on her, assessing, measuring. Not in the way men in Boston had measured her, finding her lacking against some impossible standard of beauty, but measuring her capability, her endurance, her strength of will. Around noon, they crested a long, rolling hill, and Elias pulled up short. Clara drew alongside him and followed his gaze. Below them, a valley spread out like something from a painting. A river wound through it, lined with cottonwoods and willows. Pasture land stretched on both sides, dotted with cattle that looked like toys from this distance. And there, Nestled against a rise that would provide shelter from northern winds stood a house. It was simple: rough timber walls, a stone chimney, a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. Nearby stood a barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home keeping the fire going. "That's it," Elias said simply. "That's home." Clara's breath caught in her throat. After 2 days of endless prairie and sky, after the uncertainty and fear and exhaustion, here was something solid, something real. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias looked at her sharply, as if trying to determine whether she was mocking him, but Clara meant it. The ranch wasn't grand or impressive, but it belonged to the land in a way Boston's brick buildings never had. It looked like it had grown there, natural and right. "It needs work," Elias said gruffly. "The fence line on the east pasture is falling down. The barn roof needs new shingles. The house needs, well, everything needs something." "Then we'll work on it," Clara said firmly. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Let's go meet the rest of the crew." They descended into the valley at an easy pace, and as they drew closer, Clara could make out more details. Chickens scattered as they approached. A dog emerged from the barn, barking a greeting, and on the porch, 2 men stood waiting. "That's Miguel and his son Carlos," Elias explained. "They've been keeping things running while I was gone. Good men, both of them." Miguel was a stocky man with graying hair and a weathered face that broke into a wide smile when he saw Elias. "Boss, you made it back! We were starting to worry." "Had some trouble at Widow's Creek, but nothing I couldn't handle." Elias dismounted and clasped the man's hand. "Miguel, Carlos, this is my wife, Clara." Both men's eyes widened slightly. Clearly they hadn't been certain Elias would actually return with a bride, but they recovered quickly. "Senora Boone," Miguel said, sweeping off his hat in a courtly gesture. "Welcome to your home." Carlos, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, helped Clara dismount with careful courtesy. "Ma'am, we got the house ready for you, cleaned it best we could." "Thank you both," Clara said, meaning it deeply. "I appreciate your kindness." Elias was already moving toward the house, and Clara followed, her heart pounding. This was it, the moment she'd crossed the threshold into her new life. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took Clara's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a large main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, some basic shelving, and not much else. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom. Stairs climbed to the loft above. It was spare, masculine, functional, and it desperately needed a woman's touch. "I know it's not much," Elias said, watching her take it in. "Like I said, I haven't had time." "It's fine," Clara interrupted. "It's a good foundation. Everything else can be added." Relief flickered across his face. "Your trunk should be here tomorrow. Dutch will bring it when he comes back from town. For tonight I had Miguel bring in some blankets and basic supplies." He paused awkwardly. "The bedroom is yours. I've been sleeping in the loft, and I'll continue to do so until we decide otherwise." Clara felt her face flush. "You don't have to give up your room." "Yes, I do. You're my wife. The house is yours to run as you see fit." He moved toward the door, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic intimacy of this conversation. "I need to check on the herd, see what needs immediate attention. Miguel's wife, Rosa, lives in the small cabin about a quarter-mile south. She'll come by tomorrow to help you get settled." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in the house that was now her responsibility. She stood in the center of the main room, slowly turning to take it all in. Dirt tracked across the floor, cobwebs in the corners, dishes stacked haphazardly on the shelves, the unmistakable smell of men who'd been too busy with survival to worry about housekeeping. In Boston, this would have horrified her. But here, now, Clara felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Excitement. This house was a blank canvas, raw material waiting to be shaped, and for the first time in her life, she had complete authority to do the shaping. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time Elias returned several hours later, Clara had swept the main room, scrubbed the table and chairs, organized the dishes, and started a fire in the hearth with wood she'd found stacked outside. Her dress was filthy, her hair had escaped its pins, and she was exhausted beyond measure. But the house looked better, felt better. Elias stopped in the doorway, taking in the changes with evident surprise. "You didn't have to do all this today." You must be dead on your feet." "I'm fine," Clara lied. "I wanted to make a start." He crossed to the fireplace and held his hands out to warm them, even though the evening wasn't particularly cold. "You've done good work." "It's just cleaning." "No." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "It's more than that. This place, it's been a house where men sleep between work. You're already making it something different." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she changed the subject. "Are you hungry? I found some supplies in the pantry. I could make something simple." "I'd appreciate that." They worked together in careful silence, Clara preparing a basic meal of beans and cornbread, while Elias set the table and fetched water from the well. It was domestic and strange, this dance of two people learning to share space. Over dinner, Elias talked about the ranch, the cattle they needed to move to fresh pasture, the fence repairs that couldn't wait, the plans he had for expansion if they could make it through another winter. Clara listened, asking questions, trying to understand the rhythms and demands of this new life. "What can I do to help?" she asked finally. "With the ranch, I mean, besides the housework." Elias considered the question carefully. "Can you handle chickens? We need someone to manage the coop, collect eggs, keep the population healthy." "I can learn." "There's a vegetable garden behind the house that's been neglected. If you could get that producing, it would save us money on supplies from town. I'll start tomorrow." He nodded slowly. "Rosa can teach you what grows well here, what the soil needs. She's been on the frontier for 20 years, knows everything worth knowing about surviving out here." "I look forward to meeting her." After dinner, the awkwardness returned. Evening was settling over the valley, and soon it would be time to sleep, time to retreat to separate corners of this house and acknowledge the strangeness of their arrangement. Elias stood abruptly. "I'll be in early tomorrow. We've got a long day ahead." "Good night, Elias." He paused at the base of the stairs, his hand on the railing. "Good night, Clara. And thank you for coming all this way, for giving this a chance." Then he climbed to the loft, leaving Clara alone in the main room with the dying fire and her swirling thoughts. She made her way to the bedroom, her bedroom now, and found it as spare as the rest of the house. A simple bed with rough blankets, a washstand, a single window that looked out over the darkening prairie. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of everything that had happened. 4 days ago, she'd been standing on a platform in Cottonwood Station, convinced she'd made a terrible mistake. Now she was here, married to a stranger, living in a house at the edge of nowhere. But somehow, impossibly, it felt right. She thought about Elias's hands helping her onto the horse, his matter-of-fact acceptance of her limitations, his quiet approval of her determination. She thought about the way he'd looked at the house after she'd cleaned it, like he was seeing it with new eyes. He hadn't married her for beauty or romance. He'd married her for partnership, for strength, for the ability to work beside him and build something lasting. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the hollow compliments and empty courtships she'd endured in Boston. Clara lay down on the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into night. Horses moving in the corral, cattle lowing in the distance, the wind sighing through the eaves. She was home. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, Clara felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she would face them. Whatever this marriage became, she would shape it with her own hands. She had survived the waiting. She had survived the journey. Now it was time to survive the becoming. Dawn arrived with a rooster's crow that shattered Clara's sleep like breaking glass. She jolted upright, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, her body screaming protests from 2 days of hard riding. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, why every muscle felt like it had been stretched on a rack. Then reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. The ranch, Missouri, marriage. She was Clara Boone now, and the rooster didn't care that she was exhausted. Clara dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinned her hair into a practical bun, and emerged from the bedroom to find Elias already gone. The fire had been stoked, a pot of coffee sat warming on the hearth, and a note lay on the table in rough handwriting. Gone to check fence line. Back by noon. Rosa coming at 8. Clara poured herself coffee and stood at the window, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of rose and gold. In the distance, she could see cattle moving across the pasture, dark shapes against the brightening grass. Somewhere out there, Elias was already working, already pushing himself despite the injuries that must still be healing from the flood. The man never stopped, never rested. It was as if he was afraid that stopping would mean losing everything he'd fought to rebuild. Clara understood that fear better than he knew. She was washing her cup when a knock came at the door. Opening it, she found a small, round woman with gray-streaked black hair and the warmest smile Clara had seen since leaving Boston. "Senora Boone, I am Rosa Sanchez, Miguel's wife." The woman's accent was thick, but her English clear. "I come to help you settle, yes?" "Please, come in, and call me Clara." Rosa bustled inside, carrying a basket that smelled of fresh bread and something spicy. "I bring you breakfast. Real breakfast, not that cowboy food the men eat. You are too skinny. We must fix this." Clara nearly laughed. Too skinny. That was a first. Over Rosa's excellent breakfast of eggs, peppers, and the most delicious bread Clara had ever tasted, the older woman assessed her new charge with shrewd eyes. "You have done some cleaning already. Good. But there is much more to do, and more important, much to learn. You can cook?" "On a stove, yes. I managed my father's household for years." "Stove?" Rosa made a dismissive sound. "Out here, you cook on fire. On coals, in Dutch ovens buried in earth. The stove," she gestured at the small iron stove in the corner that looked like it had seen better days, "is luxury for winter. Summer, we cook outside so house stays cool. I teach you." "I'd appreciate that." "You can shoot gun?" Clara blinked. "No." "You learn. Snakes, coyotes, sometimes worse things. A woman alone needs to protect herself." Rosa stood, wiping crumbs from her skirt. "Come. I show you chickens first. Chickens are easy. Chickens are stupid. You will be friends." The chicken coop was a sturdy structure behind the house, and the chickens themselves were a raucous bunch of hens that scattered at Clara's approach. Rosa demonstrated how to scatter feed, how to check for eggs in the nesting boxes, how to identify a sick bird from the way it held its feathers. You come every morning, collect eggs, check water, make sure no predators get in at night. Simple work, but important. Fresh eggs mean you eat well, maybe have extra to trade in town. Clara gathered eggs carefully, delighted by the warm weight of them in her basket. It was such a small thing, but it felt like an accomplishment. Next, Rosa led her to the neglected garden plot. Weeds had overtaken what must have once been organized rows, and the soil looked dry and depleted. "This was Elias's mother's garden," Rosa said quietly. "Beautiful, before. She grew everything. Vegetables, herbs, even flowers. But when she died and Elias went to war," she shrugged expressively. "Men do not think of gardens. They think of cattle and fences and money. But a good garden feeds family, keeps you healthy through winter, is worth more than cattle sometimes." Clara knelt and ran her fingers through the soil. It was still good earth beneath the weeds, just neglected. "What grows well here? What should I plant?" Rosa's face lit up. "Now we talk. I bring you seeds, show you how to prepare soil, beans, squash, corn, the three sisters we call them. They grow together, help each other. Tomatoes, peppers, onions, potatoes, herbs for cooking and medicine. We start small, make bigger next year." They spent the morning working in the garden, Rosa teaching and Clara absorbing every word like a sponge. The older woman's knowledge was encyclopedic. When to plant what, how deep, how far apart, which plants needed more water, which thrived in heat. She showed Clara how to identify good soil from bad, how to enrich it with compost, how to protect young plants from frost or scorching sun. "You are a good student," Rosa said approvingly as they paused for water. "You listen, you remember, you ask smart questions. This is good. Frontier does not forgive stupid." "Rosa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, mija." How did you learn all this? How did you survive when you first came here?" Rosa sat back on her heels, her dark eyes distant with memory. "I was younger than you when Miguel brought me to this territory, scared, homesick, knowing nothing. I burned food, killed plants, made every mistake possible, but I had good teacher, an old woman, Kiowa, who lived near our first ranch. She taught me what plants to eat, what plants heal, how to read weather, how to survive. She saved my life many times over." Rosa reached out and patted Clara's hand. "Now I teach you what she taught me. This is how we survive. We pass knowledge like precious jewels from woman to woman. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. No tears. We have too much work for tears. Come, I show you how to shoot gun before Elias comes back for lunch. The rifle was heavy and intimidating in Clara's hands. Rosa set up targets, old bottles on fence posts, and showed her how to load, aim, and fire. Kick will surprise you first time, Rosa warned. Brace yourself, hold tight, squeeze trigger slowly. The first shot nearly knocked Clara on her backside. The noise was deafening, the recoil brutal, and she missed the target by a mile. But Rosa just laughed and made her try again. By the 10th shot, Clara hit a bottle. It exploded in a satisfying spray of glass. There, you see? You can learn anything if you do not quit. Rosa took the rifle and demonstrated proper cleaning. Practice every day. Soon you shoot like Vaquero. Elias returned just before noon, riding in with Miguel and Carlos. He dismounted, saw Clara and Rosa by the garden, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or approval. Mrs. Sanchez, he greeted, removing his hat. Thank you for helping Clara get settled. Is my pleasure. Your wife is good learner, smart woman. Rosa gathered her things and prepared to leave. I come back tomorrow, bring seeds and more teaching. Clara, you remember? Chickens at dawn, garden after breakfast, practice shooting before supper. After Rosa left, Elias washed up at the pump and came inside to find Clara preparing lunch from the supplies in the pantry. She'd watched Rosa's techniques carefully and was attempting a simple stew. You don't have to cook for the whole crew, Elias said, watching her work. The men usually eat at Miguel's cabin or make their own food. I want to. If they're working for us, feeding them is the least I can do. Elias leaned against the doorframe, and Clara could feel his gaze on her back. You've been busy this morning. Rosa is an excellent teacher. She is. Best woman on the frontier, Miguel always says. I'm glad she's taken to you. Clara turned to face him, wiping her hands on her apron. Elias, can I ask you about your mother's garden? Rosa said it was beautiful once. His face shuddered instantly, the brief warmth vanishing. My mother died of cholera while I was at war. The garden died with her, not much more to tell. I'd like to restore it, if that's all right with you. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Do what you want with it. It's yours now. Everything here is. He straightened and headed for the door. I'll be working on the east fence this afternoon. If you need anything, fire 3 shots in quick succession. Someone will come. Then he was gone again, leaving Clara with the distinct impression that she'd touched a wound that hadn't healed. The afternoon passed in hard work. Clara finished weeding one section of the garden, her hands blistered and aching. She collected eggs again, swept the house, scrubbed the bedroom floor until it gleamed. Every task was an education in frontier practicality. Nothing could be wasted. Everything served multiple purposes. Efficiency was survival. As sunset approached, she started dinner, using what Rosa had taught her about cooking over an open fire. The results were imperfect. The meat was slightly charred, the vegetables a bit mushy. But it was edible, and Clara felt a fierce pride in having produced it. Elias, Miguel, and Carlos came in as darkness fell, tired and dusty. They washed up and sat at the table Clara had set, and she served them the meal she'd prepared. The men ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Miguel looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face. Senora, this is very good, thank you. Rosa taught me the basics this morning. I'm still learning. You learn quick, Carlos said shyly. This is better than anything we usually eat. Even Elias nodded, and Clara caught what might have been approval in his eyes. It's good, Clara. Thank you. Such small praise, but it warmed her more than any flowery compliment she'd received in Boston ever had. After dinner, the men retreated to their evening tasks, and Clara cleaned up, her body exhausted but her mind oddly energized. She'd survived her first full day on the ranch. More than survived. She'd contributed, learned, made herself useful. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the prairie wind, Clara reflected on the strangeness of her new life. Back in Boston, her days had been filled with meaningless social calls, needlework she didn't care about, the endless performance of genteel femininity. Here, every action had purpose and consequence. Here, she mattered in tangible, measurable ways. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The days began to blur into a pattern. Wake before dawn, collect eggs, help Rosa in the garden, practice shooting, cook meals, clean the house, mend clothes, learn 100 small skills that meant the difference between thriving and merely surviving. Clara's hands grew calloused, her skin tanned despite her best efforts with bonnets. Her body grew stronger from the constant physical labor. Rosa was relentless but kind, teaching Clara everything from how to make soap to how to preserve vegetables for winter, from reading animal tracks to predicting weather by watching the sky. The older woman seemed to have made it her mission to transform this soft city woman into someone worthy of the frontier. "You are doing well," Rosa told her after 2 weeks. "But there is test coming, storm season. This is when we see what you are made of." Clara didn't have to wait long. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday afternoon, announced by a sudden drop in temperature and a strange greenish tint to the sky. Rosa took one look at the horizon and grabbed Clara's arm. "Storm! Bad one! We must prepare now, quickly!" They raced through emergency preparations, securing the chickens, covering the garden, bringing in anything that could blow away. Elias and the men rode in hard, driving cattle toward shelter, their faces grim. "Clara!" Elias shouted over the rising wind. "Get inside the house. If this turns into a tornado, get to the root cellar. You understand?" "What about you?" "We have to secure the animals. Go!" The storm hit like a physical blow. Wind screamed across the prairie, bending trees nearly horizontal. Rain came in sheets so thick Clara couldn't see the barn from the house window. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it shook the walls. Clara stood at the window, watching lightning illuminate the valley in stark white flashes, her heart in her throat. Somewhere out there, Elias was fighting to save his livestock, to protect everything he'd worked for. She felt useless, trapped inside while others did the dangerous work. Then she saw it. One of the shutters on the barn had torn loose and was banging violently in the wind. If it came completely free, it could damage the barn wall or worse, injure one of the men or animals. Clara didn't think. She grabbed a rope from the supply closet, threw a heavy coat over her shoulders, and ran out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet. Rain lashed her face, blinding her, but she pushed forward, reaching the barn just as the shutter tore completely free. She lunged and caught it, the metal edge cutting into her palm, and wrestled it back into position. "Clara, what the hell are you doing?" Elias appeared out of the storm, drenched and furious. He grabbed the shutter from her and secured it with quick, practiced movements. "Get back to the house," he shouted over the wind. "I was trying to help. You could have been killed. That shutter could have taken your head off." He grabbed her arm and hauled her back toward the house, his grip iron hard. Once inside, he slammed the door against the wind and turned on her, water streaming from his hair, his eyes blazing. "Don't you ever do something that foolish again, you hear me?" Clara's own temper flared, hot and sudden. "I saw something that needed doing, and I did it. What was I supposed to do, stand at the window and watch?" "Yes, that's exactly what you were supposed to do. This is my ranch, my responsibility. It's our ranch." The words burst out of her before she could stop them. "You married me to be your partner, remember? Partners don't stand idle while the other one risks everything." They stood there, both breathing hard, water pooling on the floor around them. The storm raged outside, but inside something else was building, a different kind of storm entirely. Elias's expression shifted, the anger fading into something Clara couldn't quite read. "You cut your hand." "Voici, Patrice, Asquatier." She looked down and saw blood mixing with rainwater, dripping from her palm where the shutter's edge had sliced her. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." He grabbed her wrist, his touch surprisingly gentle, and led her to the table. "Sit." He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small medical kit. Without asking permission, he took her hand in his and began cleaning the wound. His touch was careful, methodical, and Clara found herself watching his face as he worked. The concentration in his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way water dripped from his dark hair onto his shoulders. "This is going to sting," he warned, and applied something that burned like fire. Clara hissed but didn't pull away. "You're tougher than you look," Elias said quietly, wrapping her palm in clean cloth. "But tough doesn't mean invincible. Out here, one mistake can cost everything. I need you to understand that." "I do understand. But I also understand that I can't be the kind of wife who hides inside while you face danger alone. That's not who I am." Elias finished bandaging her hand and sat back, still holding it in both of his. "No," he said finally. "I'm starting to see that it's not." The storm raged for 3 more hours, but the worst of it had passed. When it finally blew itself out, the valley was transformed, trees down, fence sections damaged, the creek swollen and muddy. But the house stood firm, the barn was intact, and miraculously, no one had been seriously hurt. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the air scrubbed clean by the storm's violence. Clara woke to find Elias already gone, out assessing damage and beginning repairs. She dressed quickly, ignoring the throbbing in her bandaged hand, and went to check on the chickens. The coop had survived, but the garden was a disaster. The young plants Rosa had helped her put in were battered, some torn completely from the ground. Clara stood looking at the destruction and felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. She'd worked so hard, learned so much, and one storm had undone it all. "Can be replanted." Clara turned to find Rosa standing behind her, carrying a basket of fresh seedlings. "Most of it, anyway," the older woman continued. "Storm is setback, not ending. We start again." "I don't know if I have the energy to start again." Rosa set down her basket and put both hands on Clara's shoulders, looking her directly in the eye. "Listen to me, mija. Frontier is not about never falling down. It's about getting up every time you fall. Storm will come again. Drought will come. Frost will come. Hard times always come. Question is not whether you fall. Question is whether you rise." Clara took a shaky breath and nodded. "Then let's rise." They spent the day salvaging what they could and replanting what was lost. Miguel and Carlos joined them when their fence repairs were complete, and slowly the garden began to look like a garden again. That evening, exhausted and covered in mud, Clara prepared dinner for the crew. Her bandaged hand made everything harder, but she pushed through, determined to maintain the routine she'd established. When Elias came in, he stopped in the doorway and just looked at her, really looked at her. Clara was a mess, her dress filthy, her hair falling out of its pins, her face smudged with dirt. Nothing like the proper Boston lady who'd stepped off the train 3 weeks ago. "You replanted the garden," he said. "Rosa helped, and Miguel and Carlos. You didn't have to. After yesterday, after the storm, I would have understood if you needed to rest." Clara set down the spoon she'd been stirring with and faced him. "Elias, I need you to understand something. I didn't come here to be decorative. I didn't come here to be protected from hard work or kept safe from difficulty. I came here to build a life. That means I get up when storms knock me down. It means I replant when things die. It means I contribute, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Something in Elias's face softened, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his stern features into something almost handsome. "I'm starting to see that," he said quietly. "And Clara, I'm glad you're here." Those simple words, delivered without fanfare or poetry, meant more to Clara than any romantic declaration could have. Because they were real. Because he meant them. The weeks turned into a month, and Clara continued to adapt and grow. The work remained brutal. There was always something that needed doing, always another crisis to manage. But she found herself equal to it. More than equal. She learned to identify sick cattle and treat minor ailments. Learned to preserve food for winter and stretch supplies when money was tight. Learned to handle the rifle well enough to shoot a rattlesnake that had gotten into the chicken coop. Learned the rhythms of the ranch and her place within them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the relationship between her and Elias began to shift. It started with small things. The way he started asking her opinion about ranch decisions. The way she noticed him favoring his injured leg and insisted he let her wrap it properly. The conversations that stretched longer each evening as they sat by the fire, talking about everything from cattle prices to childhood memories. One night, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Elias came in from a long day's work to find Clara sitting at the table, carefully mending one of his shirts by lamplight. He washed up and sat down across from her, watching her work. "You don't have to do that. I can mend my own clothes." "I know you can, but I want to." Clara bit off the thread and examined her work critically. "Besides, your stitching is terrible. I've seen some of your repairs." That surprised a laugh out of him, a sound Clara had heard so rarely it was almost shocking. Fair point. Elias, can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really send for a mail-order bride? Rosa told me there were women in the area who would have married you. Women who already knew frontier life. He was quiet for a long time, his gray eyes studying the worn wood of the table. Because they knew what they wanted, and it wasn't this. They wanted security, comfort, a man who could give them an easier life. And I couldn't blame them. This ranch is barely holding on most days. I needed someone who wanted to build something, not someone looking for something already built. And you thought a desperate city woman would be grateful enough to work hard and not complain. At first, maybe. He looked up, meeting her eyes. But that's not what I got, is it? What did you get? A partner who's stronger than I gave her credit for. Someone who doesn't just endure hardship but meets it head on. Someone who makes this place feel like... He hesitated, searching for words. Like it matters for more than just survival. Claire's throat tightened with emotion. It does matter. This life, this ranch, what we're building, it all matters. I'm beginning to believe that. Because of you. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Clara wondered if he might reach across the table, take her hand, close the distance that still existed between them despite all the progress they'd made. But Elias stood instead, the moment breaking like a soap bubble. I should get some sleep. Dawn comes early. Elias? He paused at the base of the stairs. Thank you for giving me this chance, for seeing something in me that others didn't. Clara, anyone who didn't see your worth was a fool. I may be many things, but I'm not a fool. Then he was gone, climbing to the loft, leaving Clara alone with her racing heart, and the profound realization that somewhere in the hard work and shared struggle, she'd stopped thinking of this as a business arrangement. She'd started thinking of it as a marriage. And more terrifying still, she'd started thinking of Elias not as a stranger she'd agreed to partner with, but as someone she could genuinely care for. The thought should have frightened her. But as Clara extinguished the lamp and made her way to her bedroom, she felt only a quiet, growing warmth. She was home. Not just in the house, but in this life, in this partnership, in the possibility of something real and lasting. The frontier had tested her and found her strong enough. Now the question was, what would she do with that strength? Summer deepened into autumn, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rust. Clara stood in the garden she'd brought back to life, harvesting the last of the tomatoes before the first frost could claim them. The plants were heavy with fruit, more than she dared hope for after the storm's destruction. Rosa had been right. Getting back up mattered more than never falling down. That's a good haul. Clara turned to find Elias leaning against the fence, watching her with an expression that had become familiar over the past months. Not quite a smile, but warmer than the stern mask he'd worn when they first met. The war and loss had carved deep lines into his face, but lately those lines seemed to soften when he looked at her. Your mother knew what she was doing when she chose this spot, Clara said, wiping dirt from her hands. The soil here is perfect. Something flickered across Elias's face at the mention of his mother. He pushed off from the fence and walked into the garden, stopping beside a row of herbs Clara had planted based on Rosa's guidance. She used to sing while she worked, he said quietly. Mexican songs Rosa taught her, said it made the plants grow better. He touched a sprig of rosemary, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. I haven't thought about that in years. Clara set down her basket and moved closer to him. Tell me about her. Why? Because she mattered to you, because this was her garden before it was mine, because I want to understand the foundation I'm building on. Elias was silent for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he knelt and pulled a few weeds she'd missed, his movements methodical. Her name was Elena. She came from Mexico with her family, met my father at a trading post. Everyone told him he was crazy to marry her. She barely spoke English, knew nothing about ranching, but she learned. She learned everything. He paused, his jaw tight. When the cholera came, she was nursing sick folks in town, caught it herself. By the time I got the letter, she'd been dead 3 months. I'm so sorry. My father died a week after her. They said it was cholera too, but I think it was a broken heart. Elias stood abruptly, brushing dirt from his knees. This ranch was supposed to be their legacy. Instead, I came home to graves and ruins. Clara understood then why he drove himself so hard, why he never seemed to rest. He was trying to rebuild more than a ranch. He was trying to resurrect the life his parents had built, to prove their sacrifices hadn't been in vain. "You're honoring them," she said softly. "Every fence you repair, every head of cattle you raise, every day you keep this place running, you're honoring their memory. Sometimes I wonder if that's enough. It's more than enough. But Elias, they wouldn't want you to work yourself to death doing it." He looked at her sharply. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted. You haven't taken a full day's rest since I arrived, maybe longer. There's too much to do. There will always be too much to do. That's the nature of a ranch." Clara stepped closer, close enough to see the dark circles under his eyes, the tightness around his mouth that spoke of constant pain he refused to acknowledge. "Let me help carry more of the burden. That's why you married me, isn't it? To share the load?" "You already do more than I expected." "Then let me do more still. Teach me about the cattle, about the business side of the ranch. Stop trying to do everything alone." Elias studied her face, and Clara saw the moment he made his decision. "All right. Tomorrow, you ride out with me and Miguel. We're moving the herd to the south pasture for winter grazing. You should understand how that works." It was a small concession, but Clara recognized it for what it was: trust. He was letting her deeper into the work that mattered most to him. "I'd like that." That evening, Clara cooked a celebration dinner using vegetables from the garden, fresh bread she'd learned to make from Rosa, and a chicken she'd butchered herself, something that would have horrified her Boston relatives, but filled her with fierce pride. The men gathered around the table, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the meal felt less like feeding workers and more like feeding family. Dutch had returned from a supply run to Cottonwood Station and brought news from town. "Saw the Henderson place got sold," he announced between bites. "Family from back east bought it, sight unseen. Wife took one look and got straight back on the train." "Can't say I blame her," Carlos said. "That place is falling apart." "She didn't even try," Miguel said, shaking his head. "Just looked around, started crying, and left." Clara felt everyone's eyes drift toward her, comparing. She'd arrived just as unprepared as that Eastern woman, but she'd stayed. She'd fought. She'd transformed herself into someone who belonged here. "Some people aren't built for frontier life," Elias said quietly, his gaze finding Clara's across the table. "And some people are stronger than anyone gives them credit for." The compliment, delivered in his typical understated way, made warmth bloom in Clara's chest. After dinner, as had become their routine, Clara and Elias sat by the fire while she mended and he worked on tack repair. These quiet evenings had become Clara's favorite part of the day. The work done, the house peaceful, just the two of them in comfortable companionship. "I got a letter from my sister today," Clara said, breaking the silence. "Dutch brought it with the supplies." "Everything all right back in Boston?" "She's getting married, to a banker." Clara smiled wryly. "Very respectable, very proper. She wanted to know when I was coming home." Elias's hand stilled on the bridle he was mending. "Are you thinking about going home?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them had voiced. "This is home," Clara said simply. "Boston is just a place I used to live." She saw relief flash across his face before he controlled it. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I'm exactly where I want to be." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement of what was growing between them despite the practical foundation of their marriage. Elias set down his work and moved to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Clara, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "When I sent for a mail-order bride, I told myself it was just practical, a business arrangement. I needed help, you needed a new start, and that was all it would ever be." He turned to face her fully. "But somewhere between you standing on that platform for 3 days and you replanting the garden after the storm, between you learning to shoot and you making this house feel alive again, somewhere in all of that, it stopped being just practical." Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not just my partner in running this ranch. You're not just the woman I married because I needed help." He reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers intertwining with hers. "You've become the person I look for first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. You've become the reason this place feels worth fighting for. And I know we agreed this would be practical and nothing more, But I can't. Clara stopped his words by pressing her fingers to his lips. Elias, I need to tell you something too. He waited, his eyes searching hers. I came here expecting nothing more than survival. A roof over my head, work to do, a purpose beyond being pitied in Boston parlors. But you've given me so much more than that. You've given me respect. You've seen strength in me that others missed. You've made me believe I'm capable of anything. She felt tears prickling her eyes. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as the stranger I married. I started thinking of you as the man I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. Elias lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. Clara Boone, are you telling me you've fallen in love with me? I think I am. Is that all right? His smile was slow and genuine, transforming his stern features into something beautiful. It's more than all right, because I've fallen in love with you too. He kissed her then, gentle and searching, and Clara felt something inside her click into place. This was what she'd been missing all along. Not romance for romance's sake, but connection born from shared struggle and mutual respect. Love earned through action rather than pretty words. When they finally pulled apart, Elias rested his forehead against hers. I should probably move my things down from the loft. Clara laughed, the sound bright and free. I think that would be appropriate, Mr. Boone. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared the bedroom as true husband and wife. And Clara discovered that intimacy born from genuine affection and hard-won trust was sweeter than anything she'd imagined in her Boston daydreams. The next morning, Clara woke wrapped in Elias's arms, the early light filtering through the window painting everything in shades of gold. She lay there for a moment, savoring the warmth and security, before Elias stirred and pressed a kiss to her hair. Morning, he murmured. Morning. Ready for your first cattle drive? Clara sat up, suddenly remembering. I need to dress appropriately. Do you have spare work clothes I could borrow? My skirts won't be practical. Elias grinned. Check the trunk at the foot of the bed. My mother was about your size. Might be some of her things in there. Clara opened the trunk and found it full of carefully preserved clothing. Simple work dresses, a split riding skirt, even a wide-brimmed hat designed for sun protection. She held up the riding skirt, marveling at its practicality. Your mother must have been quite a woman. She was, and I think she would have liked you very much. Dressed in Elena's riding clothes, Clara followed Elias out to where Miguel and Carlos were already saddling horses. Russet greeted her with a soft whinny, and Clara realized with some surprise that she'd actually missed riding during the weeks she'd been focused on the garden and house. Ready, senora? Miguel asked, checking her stirrups. Ready. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, heading toward the south pasture where the main herd grazed. Elias explained as they went which pastures had the best grass, how they rotated the cattle to prevent overgrazing, how they'd need to keep them closer to the ranch during winter for easier feeding and protection from predators. See that draw over there? He pointed to a depression in the landscape. Flash flood zone. Never let cattle gather there during storm season. Lost 15 head there my first year back from the war because I didn't know better. Clara absorbed every detail, asking questions when something wasn't clear. Elias answered patiently, and she could tell he appreciated her genuine interest. When they reached the herd, Clara was struck by the sheer number of animals. 200 cattle seemed abstract in conversation, but seeing them spread across the pasture was something else entirely. We're going to slowly push them south, Elias explained. The key is to keep them calm and moving together. If they spook and scatter, it takes days to gather them back up. Carlos will take the left flank, Miguel the right. I'll take point, and you stay behind me, watching how it's done. Next time, you can take a position. The work was harder than it looked. The cattle were stubborn and unpredictable, and it took constant vigilance to keep them moving in the right direction. Clara watched Elias work with a skill that came from years of experience, reading the herd's mood, anticipating problems before they developed. Hours passed in hot, dusty work. Clara's throat was parched, her legs aching from the constant tension of staying mounted and alert. But she didn't complain, just watched and learned and stored away everything she observed. By late afternoon, they had the herd settled in the south pasture. Elias rode over to Clara, his face showing approval. You did well, better than most first-timers. I didn't do anything except watch. You stayed mounted, stayed alert, didn't spook the cattle with sudden movements. That's something. He offered her his canteen. Drink. You've earned it. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but Clara had never been more grateful for anything in her life. As they rode back to the ranch, Elias pointed out landmarks, teaching her to navigate by reading the land itself. That lightning-struck cottonwood marks the eastern boundary. The red rock outcrop to the north is where we shelter during bad weather. The creek curves east just past those willows. Follow it, and you'll always find your way home. Home. The word resonated differently now. This harsh, beautiful land had become home in a way Boston never had. Over the following weeks, as autumn settled into winter's approach, Clara's education continued. She learned to identify sick cattle and separate them from the herd, learned to calculate feed requirements for winter and manage the ranch's accounts, learned which merchants in Cottonwood Station gave fair prices and which tried to cheat them. Elias began including her in business decisions, asking her opinion on everything from which bull to purchase for breeding to whether they should expand the chicken operation to sell eggs in town. Clara discovered she had a head for numbers and strategy, skills that had been wasted in Boston drawing rooms but found purpose here. "You're better at this than I am," Elias admitted one evening as they reviewed the account books together. "You see patterns I miss." "You built all of this from ruins," Clara countered. "I'm just helping organize what you created." "No, it's more than that. Look." He pointed to her notations in the ledger. "You figured out we're losing money on feed costs because we're buying at the wrong time of year. If we buy in bulk during harvest season when prices are low and store it properly, we save almost 30%. It's basic household economy. It's brilliant, and it's the difference between struggling and thriving." Their partnership deepened with each passing day, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Clara had never felt more valued, more essential, more herself than she did working beside Elias to build something lasting. But frontier life had one more test in store for her. The first snow came early that year, catching them slightly unprepared. What started as light flurries turned into a blizzard that lasted 3 days, trapping them inside and burying the valley under 2 feet of snow. On the second day, as they huddled close to the fire, rationing firewood and food, Clara noticed Elias was shivering despite the warmth. "Are you all right?" "Fine. Just cold." But he wasn't fine. By evening, he was burning with fever, his skin hot to the touch, his breathing labored. The injuries from the flood, which had never fully healed, had become infected. Terror gripped Clara's heart. They were snowed in, miles from town, miles from any doctor. She was alone with a desperately sick husband and no idea how to save him. "Rosa," she whispered, forcing down panic. "I need Rosa." Bundling herself in every warm thing she could find, Clara ventured out into the blizzard. The snow was waist-deep, the wind so strong it nearly knocked her down. But she pushed forward, following the fence line toward Miguel and Rosa's cabin, praying she could find it before the cold claimed her. She almost didn't make it. Her hands were numb, her face felt frozen, and she'd lost all sense of direction when a light appeared through the swirling snow. Miguel's cabin. Clara pounded on the door and nearly fell inside when Rosa opened it. "Dios mío, Clara, what are you doing?" "Elias," Clara gasped. "Fever. Infection. Can't breathe right. Please, Rosa, I don't know what to do." Rosa was already moving, gathering supplies, barking orders at Miguel. "You stay here. Warm up. Miguel and I will go to Elias." "No, I'm coming with you." "Clara, you can barely stand. He's my husband. I'm coming." Rosa looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we go together. Miguel, bring blankets and the medical kit. Clara, stay between us so you don't get lost." The journey back to the ranch house felt like walking through hell frozen over. But Clara forced herself forward, step by brutal step, because Elias needed her, and she would not fail him. They found Elias delirious with fever, barely conscious. Rosa took one look at him and immediately began issuing orders. "Miguel, build up the fire. Clara, boil water. I need clean cloths, whiskey if you have it, and my medicine bag." Clara moved on autopilot, following Rosa's instructions exactly. The older woman examined Elias's injuries from the flood, finding the infection that had been festering beneath what looked like healed skin. "This is bad," Rosa said grimly. "Infection is deep. We must clean it, drain the poison, fight the fever. It will be painful for him and hard for you to watch, but his only way to save him. Do whatever you need to do." What followed was the longest night of Clara's life. Rosa worked with sure hands, cleaning and draining the infection while Elias thrashed and cried out in delirium. Clara held him down when necessary, wiped his fevered brow, forced water and medicine between his lips when he could swallow. Hour after hour, she stayed by his side, talking to him even when he couldn't respond, telling him about the garden she'd plant in spring, the improvements they'd make to the ranch, the future they'd build together. "You don't get to leave me," she whispered fiercely. "Not now. Not when we've finally found each other. You fight, Elias Boone, you hear me? You fight." Somewhere near dawn, the fever broke. Elias's breathing eased, his skin cooled, and he opened his eyes to find Clara sitting beside the bed, exhausted but vigilant. "Clara." His voice was rough, barely audible. "I'm here. I'm right here." "What happened?" "You got sick. Rosa saved you. But you're going to be all right now." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "You came for Rosa. In the blizzard." "Of course I did. You could have died. So could you. And I wasn't about to let that happen." Clara brought his hand to her lips and kissed it gently. "You're stuck with me, Elias. For better or worse, remember?" This was definitely the worse part. A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "I love you, Clara Boone." "I love you too. Now rest. Doctor's orders." He slept, and Clara kept her vigil, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, thanking whatever forces governed the universe that he'd been spared. Rosa appeared in the doorway, looking as exhausted as Clara felt. "He will live, but he must rest. No work for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. I'll make sure he rests." "And you, Mija? When will you rest?" "When I'm sure he's well." Rosa shook her head fondly. "Stubborn. Both of you. So stubborn. But his good stubbornness is the kind that builds lasting things." The blizzard finally blew itself out, leaving the valley transformed into a winter wonderland. With Elias bedridden and under strict orders to recover, Clara found herself managing the ranch with Miguel and Carlos's help. She organized the feeding schedules, checked on the cattle, managed the supplies, handled the 100 small crises that arose daily. And she discovered something profound. She was capable of running this operation, not just helping, but actually leading. When merchants from town tried to cheat her, assuming a woman didn't understand cattle prices, Clara corrected them sharply and got fair deals. When a section of fence collapsed under the snow's weight, she helped repair it herself. When supplies ran low, she calculated what they could do without and what was essential. Elias watched from his sickbed as Clara transformed from partner to leader, and the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. "You're running things better than I do," he admitted one evening. "I learned from the best." Clara sat beside him, taking his hand. "But I prefer us working together." "We will, once I'm healed. But Clara, if something ever happens to me, don't talk like that. Listen, if something happens, this ranch is yours. Legally, completely yours. I had papers drawn up before I got sick. You're capable of running it alone if you need to." Tears burned Clara's eyes. "I don't want to run it alone. I want to run it with you for the next 50 years. "Then that's what we'll do." He pulled her down for a kiss. "Build an empire together." By Christmas, Elias was back on his feet, still recovering but determined to contribute. Clara had transformed the house for the holiday, using pine branches and dried flowers to create decorations that made even the stern walls seem festive. They celebrated with Miguel, Rosa, Carlos, and Dutch, sharing a meal that Clara had prepared from the garden's preserved bounty and a turkey Carlos had hunted. It was simple and rustic, nothing like the elaborate Boston Christmases Clara remembered. It was also the happiest Christmas of her life. As the men talked and laughed around the table, Clara caught Elias watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. "What?" she mouthed. He just smiled and shook his head, but later when they were alone, he pulled her into his arms. "I was just thinking about the woman who stepped off that train in Cottonwood Station. Scared, uncertain, waiting for a man who might never come." "I was terrified," Clara admitted. "And now look at you. You've become the backbone of this ranch, the heart of this home, the strongest person I know." He kissed her forehead gently. "You've transformed everything, Clara, including me." We transformed each other. That's what love does. As winter deepened and the new year approached, Clara stood at the window one evening, watching snow fall gently over the valley. Elias came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the rejection, the desperation, the leap of faith. She thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. They were barely recognizable as the same person. That frightened Boston lady was gone. In her place stood someone strong, capable, and deeply loved. Someone who'd proven that worth wasn't measured in appearance or social standing, but in courage, determination, and the willingness to build something meaningful from raw materials and stubborn hope. Clara placed her hands over Elias's, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of the life they'd created together. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly who she was meant to be. And somehow, against all odds, she'd found everything she'd never dared to dream of on this harsh, beautiful frontier. Spring came late that year, winter clinging to the valley with stubborn fingers before finally releasing its grip. Clara stood in the doorway of the ranch house, watching the first green shoots push through the thawing earth, and felt a wave of nausea sweep over her. She gripped the doorframe, breathing slowly until it passed, then smiled despite the discomfort. She'd suspected for weeks now, but this morning's sickness confirmed what her body had been trying to tell her. She was carrying Elias's child. The thought filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Childbirth on the frontier was dangerous, even deadly. She'd heard the stories from Rosa about women who didn't survive, babies who came too early or too sick to live. But beneath the fear ran a current of fierce determination. She'd survived everything the frontier had thrown at her so far. She would survive this too. "Clara?" She turned to find Elias watching her from inside, concern etched on his face. "You all right? You've been sick every morning this week." "I'm fine." "Better than fine, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Elias, I'm pregnant." The transformation in his expression was immediate and profound. Shock gave way to wonder, wonder to joy, so intense it made his eyes shine. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. All the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering against her chest. "Clara, we're going to have a baby." "We are. Are you happy?" He pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "Happy? Clara, I didn't think I'd ever have a family after losing my parents. I didn't think I deserved one. And now you're giving me everything I never dared hope for." They stood there holding each other as the morning sun climbed higher, both of them marveling at this new chapter beginning to unfold. But Clara's joy was tempered by practical concerns. "We need to prepare. The house needs work before winter comes again. We can't have a baby in a drafty bedroom. We'll need supplies, proper medical equipment in case there are complications. And I need Rosa to teach me everything she knows about childbirth." Elias laughed, a sound of pure delight. "There's my practical wife, already planning and organizing. Someone has to. You'd probably just expect the baby to arrive and figure everything else out as we went." "Fair point." He kissed her forehead. "All right, Mrs. Boone, what do we need to do first?" Over the following weeks, the ranch became a hive of activity. Elias and the men worked on expanding the house, adding a proper nursery room, and reinforcing the walls against winter winds. Clara worked with Rosa to prepare for the birth, learning about herbs that eased labor pains, positions that helped delivery, signs of complications that required immediate action. "You are strong, mija," Rosa assured her during one of their lessons. "Your body knows what to do. But frontier babies come when they want, how they want. We must be ready for anything." Clara threw herself into preparations with the same fierce determination she'd brought to learning ranch work. She sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric Rosa helped her acquire in town. She preserved extra food for the months when she'd be too exhausted to cook elaborate meals. She made lists and checked them twice, ensuring nothing was overlooked. But as her belly grew and summer approached, Clara began to notice something troubling. Elias was working harder than ever, driving himself past exhaustion, taking on extra tasks that could have waited. She confronted him one evening after finding him in the barn at midnight, repairing tack that didn't need immediate attention. "Elias, what are you doing? You should be in bed." "Just finishing up a few things. Things that could wait until tomorrow. This is the third night this week you've worked past midnight. What's going on?" He set down the bridle and rubbed his face tiredly. "I'm trying to get everything done, everything secure, before the baby comes." "The baby isn't coming for months yet." "I know, But what if something happens? What if I can't work after the birth? What if we need money for doctors or medicine? What if... Stop. Clara moved closer, taking his hands in hers. Elias, you're trying to control things that can't be controlled. We've prepared as much as we can. The rest we'll handle as it comes. I can't lose you, Clara. I can't lose this baby. I can't... His voice broke, and Clara saw the fear he'd been hiding beneath the frantic activity. My mother died. My father died. Everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. What if the frontier takes you too? Clara felt her heart break for him. This strong, capable man who'd survived war and loss and brutal hardship was terrified of losing her. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. I'm not going anywhere. I'm tougher than I look, remember? You said so yourself. Childbirth is different. It's dangerous out here, away from doctors and hospitals. And women have been having babies on the frontier since the beginning of time. Rosa's delivered dozens. She'll be there, and you'll be there, and we'll get through it together. Clara pulled back to look him in the eye. But you driving yourself to exhaustion isn't helping anyone. I need you healthy and rested, not collapsed from overwork. Elias took a shaky breath and nodded. You're right. I'm sorry. I just feel so helpless. Then help me by taking care of yourself. That's what I need from you right now. He kissed her, soft and lingering. I love you, Clara Boone. I love you too. Now come to bed before I have to drag you there. As summer deepened, Clara's pregnancy became visible to everyone. She continued working as much as she could, tending the garden, managing the household accounts, helping with the lighter ranch tasks. The men treated her like she was made of glass, trying to stop her from lifting anything heavier than a teacup. I'm pregnant, not dying, Clara told Carlos when he physically removed a water bucket from her hands. I can carry water. Senora, the boss said we should help you with everything. The boss needs to remember I'm still capable of normal work. But as autumn approached and her belly grew large enough to make bending over difficult, Clara had to admit defeat on some tasks. She focused her energy on the things she could still do, preserving the garden's harvest, sewing baby clothes, planning for the months ahead. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch shelling beans, a wagon approached from the direction of town. Clara didn't recognize the driver, but as it drew closer, she saw a woman sitting beside him, a woman whose face seemed vaguely familiar. The wagon pulled up to the house, and the woman climbed down with the driver's assistance. She was elegantly dressed, clearly not from the territory, and when she turned fully toward Clara, recognition hit like a physical blow. Margaret? Her younger sister stood there, looking completely out of place against the rough backdrop of the ranch. Hello, Clara. Clara struggled to her feet, her mind reeling. What are you doing here? How did you even find me? Your letters mentioned Cottonwood Station. I took a train from Boston, hired this man to bring me to the Boone Ranch. Margaret's eyes traveled over Clara's pregnant form, the simple work dress, the sun-browned skin and calloused hands. My word, Clara, you look so different. Come inside, you must be exhausted from traveling. Clara led her sister into the house, acutely aware of how humble it must seem to someone accustomed to Boston elegance. But Margaret surprised her. She looked around the main room, the scrubbed floors, the well-organized shelves, the fire burning cheerfully in the hearth, and smiled. It's lovely, Clara. It feels like a real home. They sat at the table and Clara poured tea while trying to process her sister's unexpected appearance. Why are you here, Margaret? Your wedding is postponed. Indefinitely. Margaret's perfect composure cracked slightly. I couldn't go through with it, Clara. I stood in the church in my beautiful dress, surrounded by all the right people, about to marry exactly the kind of man I was supposed to marry, and all I could think about was your letters. My letters? You wrote about working in a garden, about learning to shoot a rifle, about a man who valued your strength instead of just your appearance, about building something real with your own hands. Margaret looked down at her tea, and I realized I was about to trap myself in exactly the kind of life you escaped. A life of appearances and expectations and slow suffocation. Clara reached across the table and took her sister's hand. So what did you do? I walked out of the church, caused an enormous scandal. Aunt nearly had apoplexy. Margaret laughed, though it sounded slightly hysterical. Everyone said I was throwing away my future, ruining my reputation, making a terrible mistake. So I thought, if I'm going to make a terrible mistake, I might as well come see my sister first. You're not making a terrible mistake. You're making a choice. That's different. Is it? I don't know what to do now, Clara. I have no skills, no prospects, nothing but a scandal following me. I just knew I couldn't marry him, not when I'd read about what real partnership could look like. Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Elias walked in, stopping short at the sight of a stranger in his house. Elias, this is my sister Margaret. She's come from Boston. Elias recovered quickly, removing his hat. Miss Whitmore, welcome to our home. Mrs. Boone, Margaret corrected automatically, then flushed. Or I suppose I'm still Miss Whitmore. The wedding didn't happen. I see. Elias looked to Clara questioningly. Margaret needs a place to stay while she figures out her next steps. I told her she could stay with us, if that's all right. Of course it's all right. This is your home, Clara. Your family is always welcome here. He moved toward the door. I'll let you two catch up. I'm sure you have a lot to talk about. After he left, Margaret stared at the closed door. That's your husband? The rough cattleman who needed a practical wife? That's him. Clara, he looks at you like you hung the moon. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. We've built something good together, something real. Over the following days, Margaret settled into ranch life with a mixture of fascination and incompetence. She tried to help in the garden and nearly pulled up all the carrots thinking they were weeds. She attempted to collect eggs and got chased by an aggressive hen. She ruined a pot of beans by adding salt instead of sugar. But she kept trying, kept learning, and Clara saw echoes of her own transformation beginning in her sister. One evening, as they sat together mending clothes, Margaret said quietly, I was wrong about you, Clara. Back in Boston, when you said you were answering that advertisement, I thought you were being desperate and foolish. I thought you were settling for less than you deserved. And now? Now I see you didn't settle. You fought for more. You found a life where you're valued for who you are, not what you look like or how well you can pour tea. Margaret set down her sewing. I want that too. I want to matter. Then stay, learn, build your own life out here. Really? You wouldn't mind? Why would I mind? You're my sister, and this territory needs more strong women. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Clara. I promise I won't be a burden. You won't be. Rosa will teach you just like she taught me. It won't be easy, but if you don't quit, you'll become someone you never imagined you could be. As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch bustled with activity. Margaret proved to be a quick learner once she stopped being afraid of hard work. She took to cooking with enthusiasm, learning from Rosa and experimenting with preserved vegetables from the garden. She conquered her fear of the chickens and started managing the coop with Clara's supervision. And slowly, Clara noticed Carlos watching her sister with increasing interest. Margaret, for her part, seemed equally fascinated by the quiet young cowboy who patiently answered her endless questions about ranch life. Your sister and Carlos seem to be getting along well, Elias observed one evening. Clara smiled. She could do worse. He's a good man. He is, and she's not the helpless city girl she was a month ago. None of us are who we were when we arrived here. The frontier changes you. Elias pulled her close, his hand resting on her swollen belly. For the better, I think. Winter arrived in earnest, and Clara's pregnancy entered its final stage. She was huge now, uncomfortable and tired, but determined to maintain her routines as much as possible. Rosa visited daily, checking on her progress, preparing for the birth. Baby is strong, Rosa declared after one examination. Kicks like a mule. This one will be handful. Wonderful, Clara said dryly. Just what we need. Another stubborn boon. The labor started on a cold December morning, 3 weeks before Clara's expected date. She woke to cramping pain and knew immediately what was happening. Elias, the baby's coming. He was out of bed instantly, pulling on clothes. I'll get Rosa. Don't move. Don't do anything. Just breathe. I know how to breathe, Clara said through gritted teeth as another contraction hit. Just hurry. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Rosa arrived and took command, setting up the bedroom like a battlefield general preparing for combat. Margaret helped, her face pale but determined. Elias paced outside, occasionally being called in to help Clara through particularly difficult contractions. You're doing beautiful, mija, Rosa encouraged. Almost there. One more big push. Clara gathered every ounce of strength she possessed and pushed. The pain was beyond anything she'd imagined, but beneath it ran a current of fierce determination. She'd survived everything else the frontier had thrown at her. She would survive this. And then, cutting through the pain and exhaustion, came a sound that made Clara's heart soar, a baby's cry, strong and indignant. "A girl," Rosa announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced infant. "Beautiful, healthy girl." Elias rushed in, his face transformed with wonder. Rosa cleaned the baby quickly and placed her in Clara's arms. She was perfect. Tiny fingers, delicate features, a shock of dark hair. "Hello, little one," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to your home." Elias knelt beside the bed, staring at his daughter with an expression of such pure joy it made Clara's heart ache. "She's perfect. Clara, she's absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Elias touched the baby's tiny hand, and she immediately gripped his finger. "Elena, after my mother." "Elena Boone," Clara tested the name. "I like it." The baby, Elena, was a force of nature from her first breath. She nursed vigorously, cried lustily when she wanted attention, and slept peacefully when content. Clara fell instantly, completely in love. The transformation in Elias was profound. This man who'd been hardened by war and loss became gentle and patient with his daughter. Clara would find him in the nursery at odd hours, just watching Elena sleep, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I never thought I'd have this," he told Clara one night as they sat together, the baby asleep between them. "A wife I love, a daughter, a real family. You have it now. We all do." As winter progressed, life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. Margaret proved invaluable, helping with Elena when Clara was exhausted, managing household tasks, learning more about ranch operations every day. Her relationship with Carlos deepened, and Clara wasn't surprised when, come spring, Carlos shyly asked Elias's permission to court Margaret properly. "About time," Elias said, shaking the young man's hand. "You're a good man, Carlos. If she'll have you, you have my blessing." One evening in early March, as the first signs of spring began to appear, Clara stood at the window holding Elena, watching Elias work with the horses in the corral. Margaret was helping Carlos with evening chores, laughing at something he'd said. Rosa and Miguel walked back toward their cabin, arm in arm after 40 years of marriage. This was her life now, this bustling, chaotic, beautiful life she'd built from nothing but determination and hope. Elias came inside, stamping snow from his boots, and immediately reached for his daughter. Elena gurgled happily in his arms, and Clara saw the love that transformed his stern features every time he looked at her. "I need to tell you something," Clara said softly. "What's that?" "Do you remember standing on that platform in Cottonwood Station when you asked if I'd still come with you?" "I remember. You were covered in trail dust, looked ready to drop from exhaustion, and you still said yes. I said yes because I had nothing to lose. I was desperate for any chance at a different life." Clara moved closer to him, to her husband and daughter. "But if I could go back to that moment now, knowing everything that was coming, the hard work, the storms, the fear, the pain, I'd still say yes. Not because I had nothing to lose, but because I had everything to gain." Elias shifted Elena to one arm and pulled Clara close with the other. "I rode through a flood to reach you because I'd made a promise. But if I could go back, I'd ride through 100 floods. Because you weren't just a promise I needed to keep. You were the future I didn't know I was searching for." They stood there, the three of them, as twilight painted the valley in shades of purple and gold. Outside, the ranch they'd built together stretched toward distant horizons. The cattle they'd raised, the fences they'd mended, the garden that would bloom again come summer. This was the legacy they were building. Not just in land and livestock, but in love and partnership and the courage to become more than the world expected. Clara thought about the woman she'd been, overlooked, underestimated, convinced her worth was measured in pounds and inches. That woman seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone strong enough to survive the frontier, brave enough to build a life from scratch, capable enough to run a ranch and raise a family. The change hadn't been easy. It had required every ounce of determination she possessed, every lesson learned through failure and success. Every moment of choosing to rise when falling would have been easier. But she'd done it. She'd transformed herself into exactly who she needed to be. Elena made a small sound, and both parents looked down at her. This tiny girl would grow up knowing her mother was strong, knowing her worth wasn't defined by others' expectations, knowing she could be anything she chose to be. "What are you thinking?" Elias asked softly. Clara smiled, feeling peace settle over her like a warm blanket. "I'm thinking about how I waited 3 days on a platform for a man who might never come. How I was so scared I almost got back on the train a dozen times. How I thought I was settling for survival when I said yes. And now? Now I know I wasn't settling. I was choosing courage over comfort, choosing possibility over security, choosing to become someone worthy of this life." She looked up at him, at this man who'd seen strength in her when others saw only weakness. "You asked me once if I regretted coming here. Do you remember?" "I remember." "I didn't answer then, but I'll answer now. I don't regret a single moment. Not the hard work, not the fear, not the pain. Because all of it led here. To you, to Elena, to this life we've built together." Elias kissed her, soft and deep, while Elena dozed peacefully in his arms. "I chose a wife," he said quietly, "but I found the heart of my entire world." As night fell over the valley, Clara stood with her family in the home they'd created together. Through the window, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched her arrive scared and desperate, that had witnessed her transformation, that now looked down on a woman who'd proven strength wasn't defined by appearance, but by courage, loyalty, and the choice to stay when it mattered most. She'd come to the frontier expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found everything worth living for. The ranch would continue to grow, the challenges would keep coming, the work would never be finished. But Clara Boone, once Clara Whitmore, the overlooked woman from Boston, had proven she was equal to whatever came next. She'd survived the waiting, the journey, the proving, and the transformation. Now she was ready to embrace the legacy she and Elias would build together, season after season, year after year, for the rest of their lives. And as Elena stirred in her father's arms, opening her eyes to look up at her parents with the same fierce determination Clara recognized from her own reflection, she knew their story wasn't ending. It was just beginning.